Good morning and welcome to the September meeting of BCP Council Cabinet. My name is Councillor Miliel, and for those who are wondering where Councillor Vicky Slade is, she was elected to Parliament in the general election, and since then I was elected as leader of the council, which means I now chair Cabinet. I have to my right my newly appointed deputy leader, who's Councillor Mike Cox, and I'm also delighted to welcome Councillor Sandra Moore, who is appointed portfolio holder for communities and partnerships, and also Councillor Rich Herritt, who is portfolio holder for destination leisure and commercial operations. Really pleased to have you both with us, and I know you bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to Cabinet. Thank you. I'd also like to welcome other councillors who are not on Cabinet in the room. So hello, Councillor Patrick Canavan, and also officers. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get stuck into the meeting, I'd just like to take a moment to reflect on quite a significant loss to BCP Council. Yesterday, councillors attended the funeral of our late colleague, Councillor Brian Castle. Brian was elected in 2023, and many of us had the pleasure of working alongside him. Yesterday's service was, I think it was incredibly moving. There was standing room only, which was a testament to the kind of man that Brian was and how he served his community. I'm sure Cabinet, along with officers and councillors, will allow us just a few moments to reflect and remember our friend and colleague. Thank you. So now I'm going to ask Democratic Services, Sarah, to go through the housekeeping for today's meeting.
Thank you, Leader. Please note that this meeting of the Cabinet is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a minimum of 6 months. Please could everyone present follow these ground rules. Only speak when invited to by the Chair. If accessing via Teams, always turn on your video function when invited to speak and state your name. Please use your microphones when speaking, and please mute or turn off your microphone when you're not talking. If you are accessing via Teams and would like to speak on an item, please indicate by utilising the raise your hand feature in the bar at the top of the Teams window. For those in the room, please note that if the fire alarm sounds, please exit the building by way of the nearest available signed fire exit route and make your way to the assembly point at the War Memorial in the gardens opposite the front of this building in Bourne Avenue. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So agenda item 1 is apologies. I can see all members of Cabinet are here, so we have had none received. And agenda item 2 is declarations of interest. None have been raised that I'm aware of, but if there is anything that comes up during the meeting, then please do let us know. Moving on to item number 3, which is the confirmation of minutes of the last Cabinet meeting, which was in July. Can I have a proposer and a seconder for those minutes? Thank you, Councillor Wilson, to propose, and second, thank you, and Councillor Andy Hadley. Is there agreement that everything is fine with those minutes? I'm seeing nods. Thank you. So on to agenda item 4, which is public issues. We haven't had any petitions or statements submitted from members of the public on this occasion. However, we do have one question on agenda item 10, which is the progress update on the best value notice. That has come from Mr. John Sprackling, but I understand he can't be here today. So Sarah is going to read out his question.
Thank you. So question from John Sprackling, member of Branksome Park Camphor Cliffs Residents Association. The association is concerned about the short life of BCP Future Places Limited. Please can the council say what the costs of setting up and closing down the company were, what benefits were achieved, and what has the council learned from the exercise?
Thank you, Sarah. So this falls to me. It's in my portfolio now, so it's up to me to give a response. So to remind members of the public, Cabinet received a report on the 27th of September 2023, which explained the future of Future Places Regeneration and Development Company. In January 24, Audit and Governance Committee and Cabinet received reports relating to improved governance arrangements for council-owned companies. At full council in February 2024, a council officer, Mr. Chris Shepherd, was asked to oversee the closure of Future Places Limited. On July 25th, 24, the Future Places Limited board decided to close the company, having undertaken the necessary work, and this process is currently underway with Companies House with an application submitted. The total net cost of establishing and closing BCP Future Places Limited amounted to £5.3 million. In addition, the council incurred further expenses of £546,000 for work procured from the company, along with some minor legal and financial administration costs. The benefits are that significant technical surveys were undertaken on several sites, and that multidisciplinary approach continues to be valid and relevant information to inform the delivery strategies for the sites. In terms of lessons learned, the work Future Places undertook was preparatory in relation to the sites they were focused on, not delivery. Much of the learning has been incorporated by transferring the people into the Investment and Development Directorate, where we continue to benefit from their experience and their expertise. So we're going to move on to agenda item 5, which is recommendations from overview and scrutiny committees. These are recommendations that are not relating to items on the agenda. However, I can see online that we don't have any members present. We would usually have the chairs from those scrutiny committees. So we would usually have Councillor Carr Brown from Children's, Councillor Chris Rigby from Environment and Place Committee. However, those two committees haven't met since last time. We would usually have Councillor Bartlett, who is Chair of Overview and Scrutiny Board, but he's away. But we do have Councillor Canavan in the room, who is the Chair of Health and Health Overview and Scrutiny Committee. Councillor Canavan, do you have anything to raise that wasn't on the health agenda?
No, that's not on the agenda.
Not that, thank you. Councillor Canavan has confirmed that he's not going to raise anything that wasn't on the agenda from his scrutiny board committee. Right, so agenda item 6, which is I was just going to slightly make an amendment to the agenda, and I'll let everyone know now. We are going to defer agenda item 7, which is risk and insurance, to the end of the agenda, and that is because it includes some confidential appendices, which we think we will probably want to discuss as a cabinet. So we will move agenda item 7 to the end. It will still be presented in public, but we will, if we need to move into confidential session, then it means we don't all need to hang around until the end of that to carry on with the agenda. So on to agenda item 6, which is the council budget monitoring for 24-25 in Q1. This is going to be presented by Councillor Cox, who is portfolio holder for finance. Is there anyone on Cabinet who can second this one? Thank you very much.
Yes, Leader, I'm quite happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Over to you, Councillor Cox, to present.
Thank you, Leader. This report really sets out the projected outturn for 24-25. The report clearly sets out the challenges that lie before us with the relentless demand increases and the cost increases and the cost pressures. Headline inflation may be reducing, but public sector pay is increasing, and you just really need to look at the insurance paper later on to realise that the significance of the cost pressures in certain areas. Individual service areas are expected to mitigate the demand pressures and the cost increases, as there is no reserves to draw on to balance this year's books. I would remind everybody that included in the 24-25 budgets are £38 million of unprecedented savings and efficiencies, which need to be delivered on top of the previous year's savings of £34 million. In this first monitoring report, we have already released 54% of the optimism bias contingency to cope with the unprecedented savings target. This clearly demonstrates that these contingency reserves are needed to cope with the unprecedented savings programmes being implemented. It's a very good job that we didn't spend it, as the Conservative group would have had us do in their alternative budget. Table 1 sets out in some detail and with increased transparency where the underlying variances are occurring. Children's services are yet again proving financially challenging, recording undelivered savings and underlying negative variances. There are undelivered savings in wellbeing, which have been offset by underlying positive variances. The net car park revenue has suffered from higher than
BCP Leader.
Higher. Really?
File.
So sorry.
Sorry. You could put me off now. The undelivered savings in wellbeings are being offset by underlying positive variances. Net car park revenue has suffered from higher than budgeted transaction charges, not as reported in the Echo, from reduced car park fees. Mitigation against these charge increases are being worked on. The loss of interesting revenue from cash balances resulting from supporting the deficit in the DSG throws into sharp contrast what this council is losing. Just think what we could do with an extra £1 million of income. Paragraph 22 demonstrates that all of these concerns pale into insignificance when compared with the quantum of the deficit piling up on the DSG. It's deeply sad, in my opinion, that in dealing with the backlog of the EHCPs, we've moved BCP's record from 0% to 70 to 80% completion in the statutory time period. We have created a financial black hole, which the last government ignored and this government has yet to grasp. In recommendation C, we have asked the Director of Children's Services to produce a report setting out mitigating actions and measures in 24-25 to try and get to some grip on this particular problem. Fundamentally, the problem lies with at the government's feet. They have created the problem and only they can provide a solution. Our Finance Director, Adam Richins, must take some credit for identifying the cash flow issue which we are now facing. Time and time again, the last government buried their head in the sands and just allowed councils to ignore the deficits. BCP must cash flow this deficit. Councils are not allowed to borrow to run services. Within a year, BCP will run out of cash. The consequences of that and the inevitable Section 114 notice will be unimaginable. The Director of Finance has written to DLUC and to DFE setting out the situation, and we have lobbied our MPs. We have dragged DFE to a meeting, where they have offered us, and guess what, a consultant. I have to say at that point I let out a little scream. The leader is currently writing urgently to the minister and asking MPs to co-sign a letter demanding urgent action. If the new government continue to dither and delay, like the last government, this council, along with many others, will be brought down. The costs, not just to service users, but also to residents, staff, and indeed the government itself, will be substantial. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cox. So just to confirm how we go about conducting items at Cabinet, we would usually go to the chair of the relevant scrutiny committee to see if they have anything to add, and this did go to scrutiny. And then we will go to councillors who are not scrutiny chairs but also not members of Cabinet for them to have their say. And then once everyone has said their bit, we come back to Cabinet for discussion and for any amendments to be debated, and then for a decision by majority vote. So I can see we don't have anyone from Overview and Scrutiny Board. However, it was a long discussion there, a very thorough dive into this item. There weren't any recommendations, but it was given a good look at by that board. We do have Councillor Canavan in the room, and I don't have any councillors online. So Councillor Canavan, would you like to say anything on this item? Please do come up.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to raise a couple of things, if I may. One is just to repeat something which I said at the Overview and Scrutiny Board, which is to do with the recommendation B in your paper, which is about the revenue budget environment to reduce the adults social care budget by £5.1 million and move that money into children's. I made the point at the Overview Scrutiny Board that the health and well-being, so the health and social care, adult social care Overview and Scrutiny Board is yet to consider the budget. So we'd want to take some opportunity to have a look at that. Mr. Richings was kind enough to explain the arithmetic, which I understand, but it doesn't mean to say that I couldn't probably spend 5.1 million on adult social care given half a chance. But anyway, just to flag up that we, would welcome the opportunity, and I think the timescale allows us to be able to do that. So that I just wanted to make that point. The other thing that I think is going to come up elsewhere on the agenda is in paragraph 14, it talks about some cabinet workshop that you had in August about empowering communities. I'd kind of like to know what that is. What is our approach to that? Because I'm still searching for it. It would be good to know, because it's going to come up elsewhere, and I'll raise it elsewhere on the agenda about what are we doing to enable that to happen. But the final point I just wanted to raise was about SEND and the DSG. I absolutely accept what Councillor Cox has said. And having spoken to the two Bournemouth MPs and to the Poole MP, I know it's going to be raised in Parliament this week. So it's very much something which is a matter of urgency. I do just want to raise one thing, though, that it just my reading of it, so forgive me, but I don't think you will see a wad of money coming into the DSG in isolation. I think one of the reasons for what you might perceive as a delay is, I suspect, from what I can see, that the issue of the DSG and particularly the high needs block and SEND and all of that will be seen in a much broader context about reform to the education system. So that's all I wanted to flag up about, because I think there will be a big debate about things like the national curriculum, about the way in which the perceived lack of inclusion in some schools. I'm not saying there is, I'm just saying it's perceived in that way. And the academy system, I think, is part and parcel of that consideration. So I'm just raising the issue that I don't think the solution is just going to be send and send alone, if you understand what I'm trying to say. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you for the opportunity, as always.
Thank you very much, Councillor Canavan. I'm going to come back to Councillor Mike Cox to begin our cabinet discussion. Go ahead.
Thanks, and thanks very much, Patrick, for those intelligent comments. I completely agree with you on the send, and I'm not expecting a lump of money to sort out the deficit on the DSG grant. I don't think anybody around this table is either. But what we do need urgently is cash, and it's cash flow. And I appreciate that national government, central government doesn't deal in cash flow normally, and this is a bit of a strange animal for them. But actually, this is fundamental to whether we can carry on or not. So I'm not expecting them to just suddenly hand over dollops of cash to sort out the deficit, but I do want them to cash flow it rather than us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cox. So we are opening this up to Cabinet. I have Councillor Andy Hadley.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I think Councillor Canavan's intervention is really helpful, and I think it's actually indicative of our new clutch of MPs seem to be far more engaged with the important issues, and I think it's really welcome that we have that opportunity to have that line of communication. As Councillor Cox highlights, there is real urgency for us, and I would really welcome reform of the way in which schools seem to have the opportunity to game the system, or certainly to try and enhance their status in terms of the points mean prizes from the way it's currently set up. So I welcome that. As in terms of the rest of the report, there's a huge amount of detail in there. We are stretched in many ways. I think our two main areas of expenditure, adult social care and children's social care, we have particular challenges in moving forward with children's social care, and moving money from adults is actually and again, recognising what Councillor Canavan has just said, is really sensible in terms of that balance. But again, it does tie back to that send as being the big elephant in the room. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. Councillor Burton.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leader. Yeah, children's, of course, is my area. I just want to make sure that we separate these two areas apart, because the children's social care is one deficit area. Now, children's social care is a statutory service, therefore it is, as statutory services are, difficult to plan exactly. However, with the transformation and efficiency savings should be coming through, and to a certain extent we do have some control over that. We don't have control about so much the number of children who come into care in a year and how complex their needs are. However, transformation and efficiencies over the time should make a difference on that, and we can work on that. We have an improving service. We have Ofsted coming in the autumn, we think. When that is over, some efficiencies and transformation should start to take place, and we can start to work on that. The second bit, which has already been talked about quite a lot, of course, is the high needs block deficit, and that is very much out of our control. It is something which has taken a long time to get to this point. We are by no means in isolation. I talk to lots of councils in the southwest, and everybody's in the same situation, and across the country they are. We're in a slightly more special situation in that our reserves are so low, and therefore we're feeling it a lot more acutely, because we're sort of first in the list. And I would say that yes, something does need to be done there. We cannot control that. We do need some help from central government. I would agree that there needs to be that the whole education system needs looking at, because send in isolation, send shouldn't be in isolation. It should be part of the whole education package.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Leader. If I could just make a couple of points. One is that the Children's Services budget, yes, it's financially challenging, but it is a needs-led budget. So it is a good job that those contingencies were put in place. And then obviously I have to mention the DSG high needs block and all the problems related to that. And as a councillor, I'm fully aware of everything. But I'm also a trustee of a MAT, Multi-Academy Trust. So I also see things from the school's perspective. And mine is very inclusive schools, which is great, but they have to work really hard and manage their budget very carefully to achieve that inclusivity. And as a ward councillor, I expect this is the same for all of us, I also hear from concerned and often very upset parents who have to fight the system to get the best for their children. And the current SEND system is definitely a challenge, and not just financially, but it's a statutory service, and I know that the council has to provide it. And as we've heard, our local MPs are aware of the problem, and I know head teachers have expressed their views to the Secretary of State for Education, so everyone's aware of the problem. But for things to improve, there has got to be urgent intervention at government level. It's not just up to this council, it's going to take government to sort something out. So my fingers are crossed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Any other members from Councillor David Brown?
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, just rather than repeating what others have said, but I did want to pick up the point raised by Councillor Canavan about recommendation B, the revenue budget environment, to reduce the adult social care budget by 5.1 million and redirect that to children's social care. I sort of agree with him. You know, it'd be nice to keep that within adult social care, as that's part of my portfolio. But I think it was the last cabinet meeting on 17th July, the financial outturn report for 2023-24, which noted there about that, where that was coming from, and it just to sort of reiterate from that last meeting in July, that it was a larger the positive variance that we had in wellbeing for the last financial year. The positive outturn, a large part of that was from the final quarter, where there was a lot lower than expected demand and costs for care packages for adults with learning disabilities and mental health issues. So obviously when we set budgets, it's a like children's social care, it's a sort of demand-led budget, so you have to forecast quite a way ahead about how many cases you think will come forward, how many, and the cost of those care packages, and that's done very carefully, and there's a lot of work that goes into that and a lot of forecasting. But it does depend how many sort of cases present themselves during the year, and that could be higher, could be lower. Within children's social care, it's higher than was anticipated. Within adult social care, within learning disability and mental health, it was lower than anticipated. And because of the cost of those care packages, you know, that can easily make a very substantial difference. And as we saw, you know, a 5 million odd difference in what was budgeted. So I think it's sensible. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to keep an extra 5.1 million within adult social care, and we could do lots with that. But for the council as a whole, it's about getting our budgets as accurate as possible and well forecast. And you know, the experience of last year showed that actually we didn't have the number of packages of care, and the costs of those packages wasn't what we had anticipated. So why would we set a budget with an extra 5 million in there just in case? You know, we need to set the budgets to meet what we really closely forecast is going to happen in the financial year, and that's where that 5.1 million pound environment is coming from.
Thank you for explaining that, Councillor Brown. Any other members? Councillor Andy Martin.
Thank you, Leader. Just a couple of very brief points. When we set a balanced budget in February, obviously there was a huge amount of relief that was possible. And where are we? 4 or 5 months on, here we go again with another huge set of financial challenges. And I think it's obviously incredibly disappointing to be back in this position. But obviously we are no different from most other local authorities. So I think there's going to be a lot of noise around nationally around budgets and councils in distress and financial problems and challenges, reductions in services. So I think the messaging and our communication with our residents through this period is going to be really important. I think that's absolutely vital. I think what's also vital is certainly the last few months, when people complain to me about, well, why haven't you done this? Why haven't we done that? Why hasn't this pothole been fixed? Why is the grass too long? Why is this overhanging branch not been sorted out? It's really easy for residents to lose sight of the fact that 80+% of all our money goes on
statutory children's and adult services. And I think it's a really important message for people to understand when they say, well, what do I pay my council tax for? Well, this is basically mostly what you pay your council tax for. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. And I think that's really, really important to help people understand that kind of context. And then lastly, I would say, if you look at what's happened in Birmingham, the alternative to us not setting a balanced budget is the Chief Financial Officer issuing a Section 114 notice, which is his statutory duty. If we can't do that, that would mean, I imagine, commissioners coming in, taking control of the council's finances, making the decisions. We would essentially be bystanders in that process, and the consequences for our services would be dire, and we must avoid that at all costs. And I think that's also something that's worth pointing out. You speak to anybody in other local authorities who've gone through Section 114, it's a horrible experience, and it's one that we need to avoid at all costs. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Any other Cabinet members wishing to speak? I was just going to very briefly add to your, I think it was the middle point there, Councillor Canavan, about the Empowering Communities Cabinet Workshop. So this was originally supposed to take place, I think, in April, and because of elections and various other things, we haven't had an opportunity to get together as a cabinet, along with, you know, several senior officers, to kind of take this very cross-service approach to empowering communities. However, we did get that opportunity. We spent 3 hours as a cabinet scoping what empowering communities means. Just to give you a bit of a view, we talked a lot about our estates and rationalisation of our community assets, things like community asset transfer, and best uses for buildings which allow communities to thrive. We also covered some of our community development current funding structure and whether that needed to be changed to look at empowering communities a bit more, and also some of the funding pressures in that area as well. We looked at funding that is available for communities at the moment, so things like BH Coastal Lottery, the Cultural Fund and SIL, and whether we can kind of join some of those up potentially to make it easier for communities to access. We talked about social value policy and that we don't have one in BCP and whether we needed one. We also touched on equality, diversity and inclusion, and how they really need to be at the heart of empowering communities, so that it's not just something which benefits some communities over others, and takes a bit more of a broad approach. So that's just a very brief it's a 3-hour workshop. It was really, really useful. And from there, we're kind of gathering our thoughts on where we take this next, whether we need a cabinet paper to come on the whole of it, or whether we want to divide it up into those particular sections and take it through the process that way. Okay, so anything else anyone wants to add on this? I think we'll go back to Councillor Cox to sum up on this item.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Leader. Really, it's just to sum up is in terms of we're in challenging times. Our budgets are more or less on target. We've got some challenges to make in terms of making sure that our budgets stay within the budget. So I would recommend the recommendations in the reports and ask you to support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. So the recommendations in the Cabinet paper are proposed and seconded. Can I take all those in favour of the recommendations? Thank you. That is unanimous. So we're going to skip over agenda item 7, like I said earlier, because we want to have an opportunity to go into confidential session. So that will move to the end of the agenda. So on to agenda item 8, which is the pay and reward final position. Councillor Hannah is going to be presenting and proposing the paper. Is there someone to second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Hannah, over to you.
Thank you, Leader. Could I apologise in advance if I struggle with my throat? This is a relatively brief report, but an important one in that it does bring things to hopefully a conclusion. As you may recall, as Cabinet may recall, we did have a fairly detailed report on pay and reward at our last meeting in July. And that set out the situation where we had made an offer to our unions. We had the unions balloting members, and in the case of the GMB, members had rejected the offer, sadly with a no vote. And there was a need to address a particular issue, which was that members of the GMB were keen to know what their individual pay outcomes would be before making an affirmation. So there has been an enormous amount of work taking place since then in order to provide each individual member of staff with their own pay outcome, which is now planned to be released shortly in this month. And following that, both unions have agreed that they will hold further ballots, and we're hopeful that the outcome of those ballots will be yes in both cases, and that we will then be able to implement the pay and reward programme. The report sets that out, and it requests final confirmation from Cabinet before those pay outcomes are released. And part of that is a final confirmation of the costs involved. As part of the work that has been undertaken to establish the pay outcomes for individual members of staff, there have been detailed checks to ensure that everyone is placed on the correct role profile or job description, and also to ensure that, if appropriate, they would receive the appropriate market supplement for the particular role. That has increased the costs by the amount of 581,000 as set out in paragraph 21, and we need to approve that as an increase. So with that explanation as to what's taking place and the hope that everything can proceed normally, I would move the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hannah. So this item didn't go to Overview and Scrutiny Committee, so we don't have any recommendations. But are there any other councillors in the room who might like to speak on this? No. So let's go to Cabinet. Any Cabinet members wishing to speak? Thank you, Councillor Burton.
Yes, thank you very much, Leader. I mean, firstly, I would say that I'm really pleased that pay and reward is finally being addressed. It's one of those things. I mean, we talked about children's services costs earlier on in this meeting, making sure that we have full-time permanent staff in children's services. It is really important. It makes the service, it helps improve the service, and of course it brings the costs down because agency staff are very expensive, and therefore getting this sorted, I think, will actually help the children's services. One point I would just would like clarifying, and I have a partial answer on this already. At the moment, social work emergency duty service pay is an uplift for those social workers who do emergency work. I believe part of the pay and reward that is going to be replaced, and now other payments will be in place instead, like bank holiday working and out of hours working. I just wanted to highlight that we don't want to risk that being a lesser payment for social workers, because if that did happen, we are likely to lose permanent staff and end up having to employ more agency staff, which will, of course, although we might save a small amount of money on that, it will cost us a lot more money long term.
Thank you very much, Councillor Burton. I have Councillor Mike Cox next. Then Andy.
Thanks, Leader. Yeah, I just wanted to comment, I suppose, that the fact that we're still, this matter is still outstanding 5.5 years after BCP. This has started in existence. I find a disgrace, frankly. I think it's wholly wrong that different people are being paid, or the same people are being paid different amounts for the same job. It's just an untenable situation. And I do feel that now is the last chance saloon, both for the council and the unions. And we need to get this over the line and move on.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cox. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you. I was going to make a very similar point, actually. I think it is really unfair on staff that they are not working on the same terms and conditions after this long, and we have been trying really hard to resolve this situation for quite some time. So we obviously have to take this step. The reason we didn't share the individual circumstance was a sound one in terms of people not just voting on what it does for them personally, but what it does overall. But that was the preference from the union. So we've now changed to meet that, and I think hopefully that will allow us to move forward with the unions, and that we'll have to see what the result of that next ballot is. But that does kick the can slightly further down the road, which is unfortunate. But there are lots of other things happening meanwhile. We need to be able to move on collectively. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, similar to my colleagues, just this has taken, this is over 5 years this has taken. I remember my previous stint on Cabinet back in 2019, 2020 under the Unity Alliance, when we had initiated discussions about the pay and reward and about the unfairness of staff from the previous authorities being on different terms and conditions and different pay rates. And there's this historic reason for part of that due to national government sort of legislation, it was very late in the day that the sort of legislation went through for BCP Council to be formed in 2019. And in an ideal world, you'd have looked at all these things before the council was formed. So from day one, everybody was sorted, but it was done on a very short timescale. There wouldn't have been time for that. So it was prioritised back in 2019 to sort of push ahead with that. Following political changes, that was then, I understand, deprioritised, and I think it's to the detriment of the last administration that it wasn't progressed, because I think our human resources is the key resource that our council relies on, really, that to deliver the services for residents, and for people 5 years later to not be on comparable terms and conditions and rates of pay to colleagues they sit alongside and work alongside is really poor. And it's great to see that we've got to this point now, to be able to sort of approve this subject to successful collective bargaining with the trade unions. And I would say, if you look at the financial implications here, there is additional funding having to come from BCP Council to fund these changes. So, as in all of these things, there will be winners and losers, but there is also pay protection as part of the proposal. So, I'm content that we've done as much as we can as a council to make sure that people are protected and that this is as fair and equitable as we can possibly make it. So I'm content to support the report that's before us.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Any other Cabinet members to speak? Okay, Councillor Hannah, do you want to sum up?
Leader, before I do, could I just comment on Councillor Burton's query about social workers, and admit that I'm sorry there are so many role profiles and changes in the system that I do not know the answer to the question, but I wonder if the Director is able to help.
Thanks, Councillor Hannah. Councillor Burton and I have already exchanged email communications on this earlier, but yeah, just to clarify that the group of staff that we're referring to here are currently in receipt of allowance that nobody else in the council was receiving. So that particular allowance has been removed, and we've instead put in place allowances that will apply right across all of the services. And so that group of staff will be able to access those allowances instead, as Councillor Burton has indicated. Thanks.
Anything else to add, Councillor Hannah?
In terms of summing up, can I just acknowledge the impatience that I hear from Cabinet colleagues to get this finalised, but at the same time, can I express the amount of work that has been involved in the entire process, and reviewing the situation for 5,000 employees, reviewing all of the role profiles involved and trying to get all of it rationalized is a major amount of work. So I would want to thank the director and her team for everything that she and they have been doing. I do hope that the outcome, once the pay outcomes are released and the ballots are held, is a set of yes votes from the two unions, and that we can indeed implement, and grateful to staff for their patience whilst the process has been carried out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannah. Can I take all those in favour of the recommendations? Thank you, that's unanimous. We now move on to agenda item 9, which is the monitoring progress with the shared vision for Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole in Q1. This is one that sits in my portfolio now, so I will be presenting it. But is there someone to second? Oh, there we go.
Yeah, happy to second.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. So I'm just going to crack on with presenting this. BCP Council adopted a shared vision for Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole 2024 to 2028. So this is a new corporate strategy that is now in effect since it was voted on in May 2024, having been through various stakeholder engagements from last summer all the way to then. The vision includes a really comprehensive set of progress measures, and the paper basically looks at some of those measures and tracks the performance against those particular focus areas. So we now have baseline data, we have targets, we have levels at which we need to intervene. There is a new performance dashboard that has been built by our team here, and just to give assurance, a scrutiny board last week had a demonstration of how they can use that and how they can make the best use of it from a scrutiny perspective as well. But it also helps us as a cabinet and helps the wider councillor base and of course the public to take a look at what's going on in the council, so we have that real transparency that we want to have as a council, so everyone can get involved in their democratic rights. There is also going to be a corporate strategy delivery board, which will be set up alongside the shared vision to really strengthen the governance and provide oversight, to flag any risks in delivery, and make sure that any issues are addressed in a timely manner. So just to remind Cabinet, our corporate strategy has 3 key areas. One is our place and environment, where there are 6 ambitions across 13, and those ambitions are measured across 13 measures, so that they are monitored that way. We also have our people and communities, where there are 7 ambitions with 24 measures to make sure those are on track, and also our approach as a council around that kind of transparency and accountability side, which has 7 principles and 16 measures. We also have a red rag rating here, so if there are any issues, we will see that they are flagged, and there was one within this report in Q1, so we can just talk about that very briefly, but the fact that it has now been dealt with as far as I know. So I think that's just a short introduction. Like I said, this was scrutinised, both the performance in Q1 and also that new dashboard. And so, yeah, I would just like to see if there are any other councillors in the room now who would like to comment on it at all. Councillor Canavan.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to raise one very small point, if I may. I am one of the BCP representatives on the Police and Crime panel, And there are a couple of items in the table that looks at the progress on the vision document on page 92 of the overall pack. And it looks at the police figures around antisocial behaviour and on violent crime. And on those two figures, those two measures, it is relying on the statistics that are produced by the police. And what I just wanted to flag up is I think you need, the council, if I may suggest, need to be just a bit cautious about using police figures, because I think there is a significant mismatch between the level of antisocial behaviour and the level of violent crime and the issues that are reported and logged by the police. So we have now, I think, amassed a fair amount of evidence to show that there is that mismatch, and that there are two issues. One is that people are not reporting issues to the police, which is, an ongoing issue that we need to tackle. But the other is there are internal issues within the way in which the police log those issues that are not consistent. So not everything that is logged or everything that is flagged up as a complaint about antisocial behaviour, for example, is necessarily logged in the right way. And it's something that we're going to be taking up at the Police and Crime panel, because I understand why there is the reliance on the stats, because basically it's the only stats you've got. But I don't think they are necessarily consistent with what the actual situation is. And of course, on violent crime, the little sentence there, which says that violent crime is decreasing, with the exception of sexual offences. Well, it's a big exception, if I may suggest that. And it's something which, we are looking at on the Police and Crime panel to ensure that the necessary action is taken. I'm sure Cabinet will be aware that the newly elected members of Parliament are all, I think, raising the issue of continued problems with antisocial behaviour around the conurbation and the continuing incidents that we are experiencing or witnessing. And it does need to be addressed, I think, in a slightly different way. I know members of Parliament are raising it at their level. We're raising it at the Police and Crime panel level. But something is going wrong here. And the issue that we have, I think, is that it is about resources, and obviously the MPs will be seeking to address that. But the Police and Crime Commissioner himself has said that there is one thing to produce statistics and another thing to change public perception. And I think there's a real issue there, because those incidents that receive the headlines in the Echo are driving a kind of view within the community that this area is unsafe, and I think that's detrimental to the overall economy of BCP. So I just think we need to take a different look, and a look which spans not just a reliance on police statistics, but actually looks at the way in which we can improve our community and to try and eliminate this issue from our midst. Not easy, I accept that, but I think much more needs to be done, both politically and in terms of the relationship between the council and the police. So that's my thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Councillor Canavan. And I would just wanted a gentle reminder about the 3-minute limit. Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much for raising those. I think we will now go to Cabinet to debate this issue. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, I absolutely welcome this report, and particularly the performance dashboard. And I think actually it's interesting what Councillor Cameron was just talking about there, because I was going to raise some of that. I dive straight into the link to see the live information, because I think that's I'm afraid a bit of a data geek, and it's really interesting. It's really welcome that it's available for the public, and I think that accountability and trust is something we need to build. It's a shame that there's a lack of historic data, and some of that is just about where the data is, where we've got access to it. But I also found it quite clunky to move around, and I hope that's something that will get improved. With a bit of use and a bit of feedback, it will be an opportunity to improve it. In particular, the one element that you mentioned that is red is in my portfolio. That's around waste and the increase in the percentage of municipal waste that's diverted from landfill. And we have seen a decrease between March and June from 87.6% to 84.6%. There are actually two failures there, and it's I guess really interesting in terms of what happens to the contents of your bin once it's left your house. We take it to a waste transfer station in our refuse trucks, and then it gets transshipped off to a variety of places through a series of contracts with third parties to deal with it. And the first failure was around the local mechanical biological treatment facility. It's a big machine for dealing with stuff, and it failed. That hit both Dorset and BCP Waste. And because you've got effectively a moving mountain of waste, leaving 400,000 homes in, sorry, it's not that, 168,000 homes in BCP and a similar number in Dorset, you can't just stop because there will be a mountain of waste outside the door of the facility. So it had to be diverted to landfill. That's not at a cost to us; it's the cost to that third party that we trust to deal with the waste. But it figures in our it features in our figures. The second one was similarly. It was actually in the energy from waste. So this is about residual black bin waste, and several facilities were on maintenance across the southwest. So it was a whole southwest of England problem. There is a question for me in why it's allowed for them to do that, but of course they are competing facilities for dealing with the waste stream, and so therefore coordinating them together to do their maintenance at different times presumably is something that would be down to the local authorities collectively to come together to do. But both of those facilities are back now on stream, and therefore we would hope to see that percentage going back up. Looking at some of the other measures, I was looking particularly at increased footfall across BCP, which is a positive between March and June, as we expect it to be as we got into the summer months. But it doesn't split out the three towns, and does talk in the text about Bournemouth being somewhat behind Christchurch and Poole. But I think it would be really valuable, in terms of these dashboards, to be able to delve down into the data a bit deeper. And certainly, how is it going for people in my ward's Poole Town Centre, in Poole Town Centre, or in Christchurch, or indeed in Bournemouth, because they are distinct and different, and their performance is different. But the really worrying footnote in that was that we don't actually have funding for data collection beyond next year. And I think it comes back to Councillor Canavan's point, really, that we collect based, or we show stuff based on the data that's available. Is that the most important measure? Is it just the available measure? I know that in Poole, the Dolphin Centre have footfall statistics. We could see whether we can work with partners to present that information. But as Councillor Canavan just said, we then have to understand whether we trust that information, or whether there are riders that we need to put on that. But we do need to make sure that this information is sustainable going forwards, not least because discontinuity is a problem. There's 6 pending measures with no prior data, and again that kind of comes back to this is a very early start. I think one of those was around residents' engagement, and we've just deleted it because it's not in our resident survey. Well, why have we taken it out of our resident survey if that's an important measure? So I think we need to go upstream. And the last one for me was around in place and environment. There was something about increasing the public available EV chargers, and it's good news. We are ahead of the target, and we've also got a grant coming in from government, which we're working on now to increase them further. So I think there is some good news in there as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. Right, we are going to go on to Councillor Moore.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I just wanted to say that my ward colleagues and I had someone at our surgery only last Friday who was asking lots of questions about this council's progress and how we were monitoring it. So we all sat and we answered the questions as we could. But the reality is most of the information about the council that people ask about is actually available via the council website, and it's good that we've now got this dashboard and that's being added. And I was thinking that if it all works well, with all the bits and pieces that we could actually add to it or monitor it. I hope that perhaps the website and the dashboard could be better promoted for residents so that they could use it, because it's clearly at the moment they tend to use social media to have both the rant and ask the questions. Not actually the best place to get the most accurate or useful news or information. So I'm just thinking that in the future, when this is all the glitches are ironed out of both, it could be better promoted. If you want to know, it's here. You know, people are frequently asking questions about the council's finance, and it's there. You know, if they want to scroll through, it goes right the way back to Bournemouth Council. I've looked at it to make sure. It's massive information, and I just think that maybe it should be better promoted in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. Councillor Martin.
Yes, thank you, Leader. I know you're going to indulge me for going off slightly at a tangent here, because I've already told you about that. But I wanted just to read out those first couple of paragraphs there in the preamble. The shared vision is the corporate strategy which sets out the council's visions, priorities, and ambitions. And then the next bit, incorporated in the vision are a set of measures of progress for achieving the vision, priorities, and ambitions. And I just wanted to very, very briefly, and I will be brief, just mention that we do have another strategy that sets out our ambitions, visions, and priorities, and it's called the cultural strategy. We talk about the corporate strategy and all the time, and I have shared my frustrations with Chief Exec and the Chief Operating Officer and others, anybody who'll listen to me, about the fact that the cultural strategy speaks directly to the corporate strategy and vice versa, and yet we have very little visibility of the cultural strategy within the council, within just generally within the council, and I think that's difficult. I struggle with that, and I'm just using this as an opportunity to remind everybody that we do have, if you put the corporate strategy down alongside the cultural strategy, and I do carry a copy of the cultural strategy around with me, believe it or not, they speak to each other, and they talk about the same shared visions, priorities, and ambitions. And I would like us to talk more about the cultural strategy. This council passed that only in March 2023, but it has no visibility. We don't really talk about it, and I think we should talk about it more, and we should involve it more in what we are trying to achieve. On that note, if I may, I'll just read you one line from the cultural strategy. Our cultural strategy, these are our words. Like Arts Council England, we aspire to unlock the creative potential of our communities. We believe culture improves both physical and mental health and well-being, community cohesion, and contributes to placemaking, regeneration, prosperity, and a sense of identity. Participating in the arts and creative activity can be hugely fulfilling and helps us to think, explore, and better understand our world. We want Bournemouth, Christchurch, and Poole to be locally and nationally celebrated for its inclusive culture and creativity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. That's a lovely paragraph, actually, and I can really see the reflection in the shared vision. So thank you for raising that. Okay, so I have Councillor Wilson next.
Thanks. Yeah, again, just to, I mean, a lot of my colleagues have already said a lot of the things I want to say, and I think it's a really good document. I think it's really important, but I think it is also kind of at its infancy, and we're learning as we go along. And so there's a couple of things that I just wanted to raise as improvements. So one of the first things was around the just the baseline figures and understanding them a bit more, and kind of the period of time. So taking, for example, serious violent crime. In the commentary, it says that the baseline figure is an annual fee. Annual figure, sorry. But then the target and the actual, he doesn't say over what period they're from. It says June 2024, but that's not clear if that's a quarterly figure or if that's from that month. Because if that's from that month, we're actually probably underperforming as opposed to performing in the right way. So I think there's just some things like that that need a bit more clarity, especially if you're a member of the public and you're trying to read this. It's not as clear as it probably could be, to my mind. And another one just on that same measure of reducing the levels of violent crime. I think it came up in the overview and scrutiny board from the bit of it I caught on YouTube. Was that we're kind of having serious violent crime and sexual offences kind of combined, when I think we should be drawing them out a bit more, because I think there's a lot of different motivations behind them and just a different type of crime, in my opinion. And I think it would be important and interesting to understand the levels between them and the kind of the approach that we're taking, because I know from the Community Safety Partnership we deal with these types of crimes in completely different ways, so it would be good to draw them things out. There are a few more like that across the document, but I'm not going to spend time in Cabinet talking about them. I'll probably contact the officers directly. But yeah, apart from that, sorry, it is a really, really good document. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, I really welcome this report about monitoring our progress against the shared vision. I think we need to put this in context. You know, under the Three Towns Alliance, within 15-16 months coming in, we have discussed, we've consulted on, we've developed, and we've adopted a new shared vision for BCP, which came before Cabinet in May. And now we have this published list of measures, and we have the performance dashboard for ourselves as members, for officers, for the public to be able to access and see. And I think, you know, the great strides we've made in terms of the sort of available data and the ability to analyse it and monitor it and actually manage the performance against that, and actually change what we're doing and change what's being delivered in response to this is it's staggering, really, the advance that we've made. And I think that's a lot of work behind the scenes in terms of IT, in terms of systems installation, and it's not at not an insignificant cost. But I think it's really important that we're getting to this stage. And I know within health and wellbeing and adult social care, when I sit down and have updates with directors and have performance sort of monitoring meetings, the great strides that we've made in the data that's being collected in our service, and the ability of officers and members to monitor that, analyse that, and manage that performance across the services that we're delivering. So I think we do really need to recognise this report at Cabinet is the tip of the iceberg of what's going on within the organisation across all services. And I know we've highlighted a couple where there's, the one where there's red and stuff. So I just wanted to dip in and mention a couple where we're in green, which are particularly around the public health. So under our People and Communities PC 1B1, increasing the number of registrations from people in the most deprived areas accessing health and wellbeing support is over double what we'd set as a target, and that's a big green one there. And that's, you know, just from the description, people would be aware that's a really important thing for us to be delivering. And PC 1C1, increase the percentage of physically active adults, and that's above the target that we'd set. So there's a lot of detail in here, but I think we need to remember that these figures are really affecting people's lives in terms of sort of whether they're red, amber and green, and our ability to be able to sort of proactively monitor and measure and manage these and act on them is going to be a real benefit to our residents in the long term.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Any other Cabinet members wishing to speak? Nope. So I'm just going to briefly sum up. I think that was really useful in terms of discussion, and a lot of those points were raised at scrutiny last week as well. I've also seen Isla, who is our director for this area, sort of typing as people are talking, and I think that's really good, because this is not a static piece of work. This is something that it is still being developed and will have other measures added to it, and it will develop over time as we find more avenues for data supply, as we understand what the needs are of the public and the scrutiny committee in terms of the information they want to see, and also as a cabinet. And I think there's some really good feedback there, you know, Councillor Wilson with his portfolio, you know, understanding how those two crimes times are different is really useful for actually how we then monitor the data. I think also, as Councillor Hadley has said, around the football of our 3 towns, and making sure that if that data is important to us and important to our partners, that we have a way of funding it sustainably. So really, really useful for those to come up. I did just want to thank officers for all their time on this. I know it has been a huge amount of work, not just to get the corporate strategy together, not just to get the measures together, the monitoring, and building an actual interactive dashboard that's available to the public. And I think it is a huge achievement. So it's not just a great paper in that we get to see some of the lenses in which we can view the monitoring, the performance, but actually the performance itself. And like Councillor Brown raised, there's some good indications, and we need to be mindful not to always focus on the reds, because there are a lot of greens in there, and it's hugely important that we recognise where the council is making progress as well as where it needs to improve. So I will just have a look around the room. This is proposed and seconded. Can I see an indication of all those in favour of the recommendations? Thank you. That is unanimous. Right, so we're going to move on to agenda item 10, which is the progress update on the best value notice. I am going to be proposing this paper again and presenting it because it falls into my portfolio. Is there someone to second? Councillor Wilson?
Yeah, happy to second. Thanks, Leader.
Thank you very much. This item did go to overview and scrutiny as well last week, and I did give a very broad and in-depth introduction, and I don't want to go into quite so much depth in this forum, but just to give a little bit of the background. So the best value notice is used as a mechanism from government to facilitate engagement with an authority and to obtain assurance of the steps an authority is taking to secure compliance with the best value duty, and it's required by the Local Government Act 1999. It's basically something that government give to councils to say, we've got some concerns and we want you to assure us that they are being dealt with. And it was really as a result of the previous administration looking for exceptional financial support. So they were looking for a loan from government to support their budget. However, in the end, that loan wasn't needed, but what it did, it wasn't needed because assets were sold instead to cover that forecasted shortfall. However, the government still had concerns around how it had got into that situation, so it asked for that external assurance review to go ahead. It took place in March, and there were recommendations in relation to culture, governance and finance. The 4 that the government pointed out was the member relationship between councillors, so how many complaints councillors were making against each other, but also member relationships between officers and councillors as well. It also looked at the mid-term financial plan, and the transformation savings that were listed in that were quite unrealistic. It also had concerns about future places, and my answer to Mr. Sprattling's question at the start of this cabinet meeting kind of drive home some of the costs that were sunk into that company, and the government wanted assurance that that Future Places was in fact well governed and accountable for its spend, and also the leadership team making sure that there were development needs met and support so that our strategic and corporate leadership team were operating effectively. So this review was actually took place in March 2023, and the recommendations then came to council in August 2023 when we were issued with a letter. I should also mention that the chief executive also did an internal assurance review looking at accelerating the council's improvement journey, and it included quite a few of the points that were raised by the government in their assurance review. So this resulted in a 42-point action plan, and I'm really delighted to say that this has now been delivered 100%. Everything that the chief executive, everything that the government wanted us to do has been met. However, we're in a bit of a limbo situation because we had this letter in August 2023, and we are now past that deadline. It was in place for a year, and we have yet to hear from government on whether they wish to extend that notice or if they are happy with the progress and that we are now outside of best value and we can move on, and they're satisfied that we're in a much better position than we were before. Just to mention very quickly, we also have a SIPFO review as part of the report, which was commissioned in the summer of 2023 and then finalised in 2024 and was a result of the best value notice and one of the steps that we needed to take. Thankfully, it didn't come up with any critical recommendations, but it is included there if Cabinet want to raise anything there, because it's part of that kind of ongoing monitoring and improvement. Right, so having presented the report, I'm just going to look around the room and see if any councillors want to make any comments on it. Councillor Canavan, anything you want to add? No? Right, so we will now open it up to Cabinet. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you. Yeah, there's always a time lag on these things, and the reason this came up was actually partly some of the processes for good governance were dismantled by the previous administration because they didn't like them, and that led to some of the bad practice that got us into that place. And I think it's a testament to the officers that survived through that period and actually have brought us back to an even keel. Some of the elements are recommendations which have been undertaken, are good things that we weren't doing before, but I think many of them actually we tried at the time to fight against. So I think we're in a much better place. It is a piece of history, part of the difficult history of BCP in its early years, and I think it's great that we have gone through that with a lot of diligence, and thanks to the officers for doing that to make it to resolve the situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. Any other members? Councillor Sandra Moore.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Yeah, I remember well the reasons behind the best value, and yes, the culture is now much better, and governance has definitely improved. And I think, and I hope, our staff have a much more stable environment to work in. And I understand that essential changes have been made to the Constitution to help prevent some of the previous problems from happening again. And I just hope that this all continues. Long may it continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Moore. We have Councillor Martin.
Thank you, Leader. Just a quick point about relationships. I must admit, when I read, well, I had not, before I became a member of this council, I did observe in a couple of capacities what was going on with the previous administration, and I must say was pretty shocked by some of the things that happened. I just wanted to say from my own point of view, being a relatively new councillor here, and obviously only joining the Cabinet last year, that I would like to characterise, I hope, my relationships with officers as excellent, respectful, healthy, positive and constructive. And whenever there is a full and frank exchange of views, that is in the context of my previous comments, not in the way that sometimes people use the words full and frank exchange of views. I'd also like to thank the Chief Executive and his officers for, somebody I think used the phrase steering the ship, steadying the ship, and bringing us to where we are today, which is a very different place. I just want to refer back briefly, if I may, to the overview and scrutiny meeting last week. I wasn't there, but I have watched back some of the discussion on best value. And I think it's only right to bring up something that cannot be left unchallenged. This relates to something that a couple of things that Councillor Broadhead, the leader of the opposition, is obviously not here today. I can't see him anyway. Some things he mentioned in relation to best value. The first thing I wanted to comment on was his rather flippant and casual playing down of the significance and seriousness of what led to the council being slapped with best value notice. It's just a few issues around culture and its problems with the new council. It was a real bit of rewriting history there, and I don't think any of us would recognise his characterisation of what that was all about. It was interesting, his insistence, or it was incumbent upon councils to be whiter than white and cleaner than clean. That was very noteworthy, and I really don't need to make any points about the previous administration in the context of that phrase. But on a more serious matter, I wanted to, for those of you who weren't there, and to remind those of you who were there, some of the things that he said, and I'm going to quote it because I think it does need quoting. He said, "Not a week goes by that I don't get a phone call from someone," and he was talking about developers, "who tell me that they're having conversations with senior council leadership about joint ventures, acquisitions, deals, etc." And then he said, "I'm not trying to say there is cloak and dagger things going on, but I just do genuinely think that is very concerning that I hear about a number of high-level conversations, to be really brutal. I've had people ring me up and say they are striking deals with the council, and they've had, senior conversations, and there is going to be a process following. It could be absolute nonsense, and it probably is. But, when you hear from a number of people they are having meetings, I just think there needs to be clearer transparency. On one level, you can just be a bit indignant over what he might be referring to or might be insinuating. On another level, one might feel really angry that he's made unsubstantiated claims or remarks about these conversations. So he's clearly got very good links with the development community, and we know reasons why that. He used to be responsible for regeneration. He was deputy leader of the council and leader of the council. So whatever. However, it's a pity he isn't here, because I do hope that if he's got anything to say, and if he's had these conversations, he will probably know. Obviously, he will know who he's been talking to, and he will probably also know what sort of deals have been struck that he's alleging. So I do hope that he will, if he has any information, he will do the decent thing and provide that to the chief executive, so that the chief executive can investigate. And I would like to, if he was here, I would certainly like to ask him whether he could give an assurance that he and any of his colleagues in the previous administration had any meetings with developers without officers present, because I can give an assurance that no member of this cabinet has met with any developers or potential developers without an officer present. And I'm pretty sure that Councillor Broadhead cannot give that assurance. So in essence, I think Councillor Broadhead needs to put up or shut up, substantiate his inferences and innuendo, and let things be investigated. Otherwise, I think there's an apology due, and I hope we hear from him very soon. Thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Councillor Martin. Quite a lot to digest there. Right, I'm just going to go to Councillor Wilson.
Cheers, thank you. So firstly, I want to thank everyone for the work that's been done since the best value notice. I think that we're in a much better place culturally and as a council over the course of the best value notice. So in some ways, I think it's been a really useful thing, because it's given us a clear direction on how we can change the council for the better. And I think a big part of that, to be honest, has been the new cohort of councillors. There's been a lot of fresh faces, and I think a lot of them, even ones from opposition parties who we don't necessarily have the same political ideology as, have approached things in a much more constructive and a much more curious way, as opposed to previous councillors. I think the freshness that the 2023 elections brought has been really, really useful. And it's fantastic to see that we've had these 42 actions marked as complete. However, I would be really cautious about that. I think some of these things need to be long-standing actions that we monitor on a regular basis, because otherwise you have the potential to let rot set back in. And I think we really need to kind of continue to think about a lot of these actions, because a lot of them are long-term cultural things that we needed to change, and we need to continue to monitor and make sure that they stay as they are. And whilst there have been a lot of actions, there are things, for example, the implementation of the governance review that needs to go forward. So there's things that, although we've marked them as complete, they do have life after them. So yeah, just really want to say thank you for all the work that's gone into it. I think it's very positive. I think we're in a much better place. And yeah, that's what I need to say. Cheers.
Thank you very much, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Brown?
Yes, thank you, Leader. Yeah, following on from particularly Councillor Martin's comments, I think we do need to remember where this came from, and you know, the environment of this council back when this best value notice was served, and I really welcome sort of where we are, and particularly one thing that I've mentioned at council meetings previously under the previous administration, number 9, about establishing 1 or 2 separate portfolios for finance and transformation to be held by someone other than the leader. And the progress is that, you know, we've now got a separate leader and portfolio holder for finance and portfolio holder for transformation. And I was very critical at the time that, in effect, the leader under the previous administration made himself the Prime Minister and the Chancellor of the Exchequer in one role. And so when he did, shall we say, dodgy financial arrangements, he only had to answer to himself. So I think that's all of these are a great step forward and great progress. And without wanting to sort of go back over history, but you know, as mentioned by Councillor Martin, there are others who like to try and rewrite history. My reflection on this report, and actually the previous reports we've had at today's cabinet about the budget monitoring, about pay and reward, and about monitoring our progress, is that overall, as a local authority, we have 3 key resources at our disposal to deliver the services for residents. We have our human resources, our staff that well trained and experienced and qualified to deliver the services that we need. We have our financial resources, the council tax and the money that we collect and the cash balances that we have. We have our property and our land and our estates resources as well. And we need to manage all of those prudently, properly and effectively. And I have to say, under the previous administration, they just totally got the priorities in those 3 areas completely wrong. The financial resources, they decided they would have an innovative approach to that, which even a government minister termed as dodgy. The property approach, they had a very speculative approach and set up future places, which ended up being very costly and very wasteful. And the human resources side of things, I'd say they had a dismissive approach, and they deprioritised the pay and reward, which was the most critical thing we had to deliver for staff. So I think they've had totally their priorities in all of those resource areas wrong. And I would say that under the 3 Towns Alliance, that we've got our priorities right now in terms of prioritising our human resources and getting pay and reward through proper, prudent, responsible management of our finances, and no innovative, imaginative schemes, and proper management of our property resources in terms of let's get decisions made in terms of what we're doing with our property. Let's not be property speculators and big property developers. That might be exciting and all those shiny things, but let's just do it properly and prudently. So that's my reflection on the whole meeting so far and where we are with this best value notice.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Leader. I just wanted to tell Cabinet, I suppose, that I had a meeting just before this meeting with the auditor, and he made it very clear to me that this council has made substantial progress in terms of both finance and governance, and that was reflected in his report to the audit and governance meeting, the last meeting, in terms of the his value for money reporting. He was very clear that, you know, we've gone a long way He did make it clear, however, that he considered that we were out of ICU, but we're not out of the hospital yet. So there is still some way to go. The fact that the best value notice has not been renewed, I think, is a really good thing. As far as I'm concerned, we're out of it. If they haven't renewed it, that's their problem. We're not in it. So I think it is really good progress, and we should continue that progress.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cox. Any other members of Cabinet wishing to speak? No, I think just to briefly sum up, this has been a real journey this last year, and I'm very grateful to officers actually for all the work that's gone into complying with the best value notice, and not just officers but also councillors. A lot of the criticisms from government were around the fact that we had a really, really toxic environment in the previous council, and I think we got a reminder actually at overview and scrutiny of why that toxicity was there, and how it felt though when we have things like unsubstantiated accusations. But at the same time, I would also say I've been very aware, having moved from deputy leader into leadership, of some of the scenarios where you just need to be extra precautious about where you put yourself in a situation to make sure that you're not vulnerable to any of these best value problems, and just being super conscious, I think, of how things are perceived from the public. So it's been really interesting for me finding myself in certain situations where you have to kind of move away and say, that isn't something I can discuss. So it's really brought home to me the importance of sticking to the best value notice and making sure we continue to comply. And I think there also needs, which was discussed at scrutiny, a reminder for all councillors that we all have a responsibility to continue with the points in the best value notice. One of the asks during overview and scrutiny was that we have these circulated again as a reminder, and that when we get new councillors elected, that they are also trained and told around what the expectations are with regards to those changes in the constitution and the rules that have come in. Okay, so I think that is that item complete. So I'm just going to look around the room and ask for an indication that we're happy with the recommendations in that report. Can I see some hands? Thank you. That is unanimous. Okay, so I was going to say I've got the next paper, but I don't. We're going to move on to agenda item 11, which is financing nature, and this is going to be proposed and presented by Councillor Hadley. Is there anyone who would like to second it? Thank you, Councillor Martin. Councillor Hadley, over to you.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, just listening to Councillor Brown talking about innovative schemes, I'm slightly worried that this is an innovative scheme, but for a very good reason. And I'm really grateful to Ruth Warden, who's actually broken off from her annual leave to be here, because she's done an awful lot of work on this as one of the officers leading on this work. This is a consequence of the Environment Act 2021, which puts obligations on developers to do biodiversity net gain, and ideally it should be on the site where they're doing the development, but if they can't, it needs to be off-site, and there is a mechanism set nationally in terms of how that's accounted for, what the value of the credits that they can gain are based on the habitat that they're buying into and the improvement in that habitat. And quite a few local authorities have been attempting to say this is really important to us to try and preserve our green spaces. And I just heard what colleagues said about Councillor Martin said about the cultural compact, but there's equally around nature, how we continue to fund our natural environment and try and make sure that natural spaces are available to our local public rather than being spent on some schemes elsewhere or even offshore. that it's improving the natural environment in our own area. We've had support from a community interest company called Finance Earth, who have been funded by the National Trust to do this work with us. So they've been helping us with some analysis, which we haven't had to pay for in order to get to where we are at the moment. And there are, as I said, quite a few other local authorities that are also looking actively at this work. The leading one is Plymouth, and they have a vision called Ocean City Nature, where they are investing in some of their parks and open spaces and green spaces, and inviting people to put their the money obligations for development into that. We have options in the paper around whether we just continue as we are. It would be possible that effectively anyone, a farmer or anyone else, could offer up a field and say, you know, you can buy into this, and I'll increase the biodiversity of it, and make that happen. So we could just let the market do it. We could look at leasing our open spaces and certain spaces that are available within BCP to third parties to manage on our behalf. But we would then lose control of what they do with it, or how that works. Or we could create our own mechanism, either internally or with a third party, to broker this work. The recommendation is that third one, to create our own mechanism. This is not the final decision. There's still work to be done in terms of how that will actually look. There has been cross multiple parts of the organisation discussion about how best this might be achieved, how we ensure that it meets the need and meets good governance of our green spaces going forwards. But this is about improving the principle of creating that mechanism, and how we establish that best model. It's also about, in principle, looking to our community infrastructure levy to seed fund it, to enable us to make the cases to get some of our spaces into a position where they could be offered up as credits. And the third recommendation is a proposal to come back to Cabinet within 9 months with the mechanism that we think would work. So I think, you know, the key bits about this are helping us to maintain our green spaces and to ensuring public access to those spaces is features, because if it's done in the private sector, then it might just be about biodiversity net gain without public access. And that's, again, something that we would like to ensure happens. So I hope it's an innovation for a good reason. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. So this item didn't go to Environment and Place Overview and Scrutiny Committee formally, but we did have some really good sessions to understand it a little bit more there for councillors. I just want to look around the room and see if anyone wants to speak on this. So Councillor Patrick Canavan, you're very welcome to. Please do come up.
Thank you, Chair. We'll try and keep this brief. Hesitated speaking at all about this item because I actually support the option 3 that, you know, is in front of you in terms of either keeping it in-house or going to an arm's length company. I'm sure the Chief Executive will not be too surprised in the fullness of time when he receives an email from me that, despite my colleagues in Plymouth deciding to go down the arm's length route, could he possibly find a way of doing it in-house? I'm sure he won't be surprised by that, but that's just flagging that up. I don't want to labour the point, but I believe this is a completely artificial and unnecessary market that's been created here. It's not your fault, but it's something that has been created. And the problem now for BCP is that if it doesn't do something, if it decides not to do anything, the risks are too great to ignore. So I think that's the conundrum for the council. But this whole issue of habitat banking vehicles, in my view, is a bit of a get out for developers. What we want developers to do, in my view, is to ensure there is biodiversity net gain on the sites that they are building, and if they can't do it on that site, they do it within BCP. And that's why I think the clause in there which says ensuring that a developer can use this BNG spend, whatever whatever on earth that is, to find a home for that within BCP. That is really important. So I thank the officers for the presentation. It was really helpful, actually. And I think this paper, I'm sure Councillor Hadley will correct me if wrong, but I very much see it as a start of a 10, really. There's still a lot more work to do along the track of this. But at some point, I think we do need to get to grips with what we can do, what more we can do to ensure that developers do, that we can make, in inverted commas, developers use the sites that they are building on to enhance biodiversity net gain, and if not, to retain it within BCP. And I've flagged up people at the house now, so that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Canavan. I also just want to I'll open this up to Cabinet now to see if anyone would like to contribute, because I can't see any members outside of Cabinet interested in contributing. So, Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Very briefly, can I thank Councillor Hadley for referencing the cultural strategy? So my plea to give it more visibility has already started working. My other passion, as certainly Councillor Hadley will know, is the environment and our open spaces and our trees. There's particularly one very important piece of woodland that I'm been working very hard to save. I think we do actually have. So we have the corporate strategy, we have the cultural strategy, we do actually have a biodiversity environmental strategy with loads of different strands in it. So the local plan has a really important focus and tough policies on our natural environment and protecting wildlife habitat. We have the urban forest strategy, we have neighbourhood plans, and obviously we're coming on to one of those in a minute, which actually has some very interesting environmental aspects to it. So I think it's brilliant that I really welcome this report and all the work that's gone into it. I just think it's brilliant that we do have the third pillar of our another pillar of our strategy is environment and biodiversity in its different forms, and I think it really shows this council's commitment to our natural environment, to our wildlife, to habitat, and to all the things that those bring to our communities and to us as individuals. So I really welcome it. And just finishing on trees, I only this morning during this meeting I sent an email to our arboricultural manager to ask him what's happening with the replanting of 70 trees that are part of a planning condition that hasn't yet been done. So the battle for the environment goes on every day. Never thought I'd be saying that, but it does. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Martin. And I agree, a lot of it comes down to not just the kind of climate aspect, but the ecological, and especially in our local areas, we are a very urban area, and it's essential that we do what we can to protect our natural environments and add to them. Councillor Burton.
Thank you very much, Leader. I would agree with very much of what's been said here. I think any development looking at biodiversity, where the development happens, has to be the first priority. We're also very lucky, or we have a lot of responsibility actually in BCP, because we have some incredibly rare natural environments, some internationally rare natural environments within BCP, and therefore anything that can't be done on where the development is, it should be kept locally. However, what I would say is, of course, if wildlife doesn't adhere to the same boundaries that we adhere to, much wildlife, you need corridors, you need space around, and therefore I would say just one word of caution, maybe it should be BCP plus things which border onto BCP, because there's many bits of our local environment which actually goes across the boundaries into other local authorities, and there's our areas, of course, which we assume is in BCP but isn't. I'm thinking of things like Bull Harbour, for instance. Therefore, it needs to be focused on improvement of biodiversity within BCP, even if that means going slightly across the border.
Thank you, Councillor Burton. Any other members of Cabinet wishing to speak? No. Councillor Hadley, anything to sum up?
Thank you. Yes, Leader. Yes, I hear you loud and clear, Councillor Canavan. I have been pressing quite hard on that point around we spend civil money or we facilitate civil money, and I don't actually see that this is that different in the sense that we could construct a mechanism. There's the reason that a lot of people are going for the arm's length organisation is to resolve a conflict of interest, but I think the other model could work. I think the feedback I've had so far, and again, Ruth has been looking at this in some detail, is that none of the other local authorities that have made progress yet have definitely opted for an in-house model. So we might be breaking new ground if we did that. So I think we need to be to understand what we're going into it if we did it. I also agree with you. I think it's an artificial and potentially unnecessary market, but given that it is there and given that the money will otherwise leach out to projects in a completely different part of the country potentially, I think we have to do what we can to protect and support our green spaces and our valuable environment. And I think that's also recognising the real struggle that we have in terms of getting developments to get across the line at all, and the whole balance between the spending on SIL Section 106 on the nutrient load, particularly obviously in Christchurch that's stopping all development at the moment, on places like the New Forest special area, expecting us to fund their needs, and on social and affordable housing. And if you take all of those things, actually, there's a significant amount of money on every development. So I think we need to make sure that the money is well spent and spent locally. I'd like to thank Councillor Martin for mentioning actually that this sits within a whole structure of things around our environment, and the tree planting is really important. But actually, our urban forest strategy talks about retaining and nurturing the trees we've already got, because a mature tree is much better in terms of the climate benefit and the ecological benefit than a small tree, not least because half of them get demolished by young people with nothing better to do. The point that Councillor Burton raised about the borders of BCP is really important, and obviously we're working with Dorset Council and the National Trust on the concept of the Stour Valley, and part of this work is around the Stour Valley, which is of interest obviously to the ward that you represent, but also our nutrients policy is around the Poole Harbour and indeed Christchurch Harbour. So I think we do need to think about how we work with our neighbours, but equally, the previous administration spent a load of money on something at some distance from BCP, which has a benefit in terms of nutrient load in the Poole Harbour catchment area, but it's not accessible to members of the public locally, especially where we've suggested that they don't necessarily need to have a car to live in the place. They can't actually get out to Beer Ridges to get to the Wild Woodbury. Thank you. I'm grateful for the support, and it is a complicated process. And as Councillor Canavan said, it is a first step. It is trying to be transparent and help to build something that works for people living in BCP and those people who are aspiring to live in BCP. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hadley. So, can I take all those in favour of the recommendations? Thank you. That's unanimous. Right, we're going to move on to agenda item 12, which is the Herne Neighbourhood Plan. This comes under my portfolio, so I'll be presenting and proposing, but is there someone to second? Thank you, Councillor Martin. So this is a very long awaited process for Herne Parish Council and for the residents of Herne, who have been working on creating a neighbourhood plan for some time, I'm aware. And we are finally at the stage where this has not only been created, but it has gone through all the various hoops it needs to, and it's gone to the examiner, who has then come up with a batch of modifications to make to the neighbourhood plan. And basically the cabinet paper asks us to accept those modifications and agree to them, and also to then agree that this can basically go ahead to a referendum so that the people of Herne can finally have their say on whether to adopt this plan or not. So it's a really, I think it's brilliant when we have our communities coming forward with taking control of the future of planning and development in their area, being able to feed into that and come out with something that gives them a little more empowerment when it comes to shaping and placemaking in their own communities. So I would just like to open this up to councillors who are not in cabinet. Councillor Cameron, no, but I do understand that Councillor Phipps has submitted a statement on this, which will be read by Sarah from Democratic Services.
Thank you. So a statement from Councillor Margaret Phipps, the ward councillor. I'm very pleased that the Herne neighbourhood plan has finally made its way to cabinet for approval to go out to referendum. It has been a very long process to get to this point. The neighbourhood plan boundary, which is the parish boundary, was agreed by Christchurch Borough Council in February 2019 before its dissolution. The parish council and parish steering group have spent a huge amount of time researching and putting together the plan, even meeting remotely on Teams during COVID. Ultimately, the completed plan was submitted to BCP Council in December 2022. It has taken 20 months to progress to this point. An examiner has now given his report with recommended modifications, and I ask that you all agree to this, to let this neighbourhood plan with those modifications go out to referendum as soon as possible. This plan has been a long time in the making, and it will be a real achievement if we can get it adopted very soon. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Right, let's open this up to cabinet. Anyone wishing to speak on this item? Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Leader. Really, this is just to sort of thank Councillor Phipps for the huge amount of work that she put into doing this. Speaking as a resident of Herne, it's very much appreciated by the residents, and I think she deserves some credit for getting it this far this quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cox. Councillor Martin.
Thank you. Just very briefly, there are a few things I will please take notes because I will be testing you later on. A little bit about Herne that you might not know. I think it's interesting. There are 200, you won't know these either, 264 households in Herne, not many, of which the population is around 500. Obviously, 2 of them are accounted for with Mr. Cox and his wife. It's the largest parish in the whole of BCP, with a very tiny population and a core of around 60 homes in the centre of Herne village, with the rest of the properties scattered around the parish. Back on the environmental trail, it's obviously a rural parish with swathes of heathland, sites of special scientific interest, acres of forest, and the internationally protected Avon Valley Ramsar wetlands. It's unique in having such a large area and such a small population. The largest employment area in the whole of Dorset being Herne. That'll be Herne Airport, not Bournemouth Airport. Margaret's told me to say Herne, with its operational site and industrial facilities. In addition, it's a historic parish mentioned in the Domesday Book with many listed buildings and the Herne Conservation Area at the heart of the village. Herne residents are very proud of where they live, and the policies in this neighbourhood plan will help to preserve and conserve the parish of Herne. So, and it is part of that sort of jigsaw that we were talking about earlier on in terms of protecting our environment. So thank you, Leader.
Thank you very much, Councillor Martin. Any other cabinet members? Councillor Hadley.
Yes, thank you. I think this is really interesting in terms of as Councillor Cox has already paid tribute to Councillor Phipps for laying this out, but it's also really interesting in terms of the depth and detail that the examiner went into in reviewing the document, and it's an important piece of work. I think it also reflects in terms of those comments the balance. Sorry for the background noise. The windows are just being washed right now. It reflects the complexities and the balance between the local plan, the neighbourhood plans, and what we as a planning authority can do in response to developers, and some of the submissions into this plan are clearly from people in the parish who have things they want to do with the space. We have a significant housing crisis, and I think the plan actually offers a very small number of houses because it's a very rural community and it's very different in nature to many of our urban areas, but that's probably something to celebrate in terms of certainly for those people who live there. So it's great to move forward with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. Anyone else looking to speak? And I think just to reflect on what Councillor Hadley said, when I was actually quite shocked to see the amount of information that comes back from the examiner. They really take this process very, very seriously. It also drove home to me how much work it takes to get a neighbourhood plan that is sound and that can then go forward to a referendum. So can I take an indication from Cabinet that we are happy we're happy with the recommendations that are listed in the paper? Thank you, that's unanimous, and I wish Herne Parish every luck in its referendum and deciding on what the future looks like there. Okay, so we are now going to agenda item number 13 and the commissioning and procurement transformation update. This is going to be presented and proposed by Councillor Hannah, but is there someone to second?
Yes, Leader, happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. Councillor Hannah, over to you.
Thank you, Leader. Just to comment on an interesting little anomaly, which is that where it lists at the beginning of the report who is doing what, the portfolio holders are set out as Councillor David Brown, followed by myself. And it might be worth just clarifying that Councillor Brown has held the portfolio for procurement for the time since we became the administration. That has now passed to me within Transformation and Resources. But I'd like to express appreciation to Councillor Brown for the work that he has undertaken and for the way in which we've been able to work together looking at this report. The report itself covers a number of things, one of which is simply an external need to respond to the Procurement Act 2023. The report sets out what that act is requesting of us and indicates that we will need to be working on our strategy and procedures in order to respond to it, and also the training and education of our staff to ensure that they comply with it. And there is more detail on that in the report itself. But what the report also covers is a rationalisation of the way in which procurement is being handled within the council. And that's where there is another anomaly in that list of people and roles, where the corporate director for the report is given as the Director of Wellbeing. And with no disrespect whatsoever to the Director of Wellbeing, it was something of an anomaly to me that procurement came within that overall role, although the history of that is something that I can understand. But what we had was an in principle agreement established some years ago that we would have a centre of expertise for procurement. That came under the director, but it also changed as needs arose and Children's Services started to undertake its own procurement separately. And that made sense in terms of the expertise within Children's Services. What did not make total sense was the way in which general procurement came within the Director of Wellbeing. So the suggestion was that we needed to review the way in which things were structured. That has been reviewed by the Transformation Board, and the board has recommended that the Centre of Excellence moves to the Director of Finance. So that is part of what this report is covering. That said, I would like at the same time to express appreciation to the Corporate Director of Wellbeing for her work in handling procurement as a whole and for bringing together this particular report and its recommendations. The report has in its appendix the proposed management strategy, which sets out in quite some detail the aims and objectives that the Council will have for procurement. I won't go into that in detail, but I will acknowledge the massive amount of work involved in all of it, given that we have of the order of 600 contracts with providers of various different kinds. So there is an enormous workload there. And what the report also covers is the way in which there will be oversight of all of that work in the future, with the establishment of a new contract management board for officer oversight, and that will be chaired rightly by the Director of Finance. But what the report also introduces is clearer member oversight of procurement, with 6 monthly reports to members through the Audit and Governance Committee. So there is a fair amount of restructuring taking place, but I think it will be beneficial to the Council, to the procurement process, and to our need to ensure that we get best value at all times. So that said, I would ask the Cabinet to agree the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hannah. So this item also didn't go to scrutiny, so I won't invite chairs to speak, but are there any councillors in the room that wish to speak? Councillor Patrick Canavan, if you could come up, please.
Chair, I'm not clear whether this has been through any kind of scrutiny process, and that is my main concern about this paper. I think I would probably have to disagree with what Councillor Hannah has just said. I am very grateful for the opportunity of coming to these meetings, of you being patient enough to listen to my ramblings, but this paper concerns me, not because of what it says, but because of what it doesn't say. So for me, an important ingredient of the Procurement Act 2023 was the issue of social value. And if you try and encapsulate social value in just consulting or involving the communities in decisions which are being made, it's not going far enough. In my view, it's that the whole issue of the procurement strategy should enable you as an authority to pass assets to the community. And if it doesn't do that, it's failing in its community value. So I'm not sure whether there is an opportunity, given what, given the timescale of all of this, whether there is still an opportunity for it to go through some kind of scrutiny process, because I think that would be valuable. I'm not saying that the officers and all the work that's been done should, just be put in the bin and you start again. I'm not suggesting that at all. But I think there are improvements, significant improvements that could be made to this document that would enable the authority to take stronger action to not just involve communities, but to pass the power to communities. I mean, I find it complex, the whole procurement thing. So any rationalisation and simplification of it is welcome. So I'm not arguing about the structural changes, but my concern about changing it away, moving it from well-being to the financial directorate is not about the personalities, but it changes the emphasis to one that drives compliance and ensures best value. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but it ignores the social value aspect of the Procurement Act, and that's what I find difficult to accept. That in everything we do, we need to think about the community that we serve, and just ticking boxes about how much it costs and whether we're getting value for money isn't good enough. We have to go further than that. So thank you once again for putting up with me. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Canavan, and I think actually we're all very grateful for you coming to Cabinet and kind of acting as the opposition, and it makes for good governance, doesn't it, having a different view? So thank you. Right, I'm going to open it up to Cabinet. Councillor Hadley.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, it's really interesting in terms of social value, and I think Councillor Cameron makes a really good point there. Although I do worry sometimes about passing assets to the community, because we hold assets on behalf of the community and try and ensure that they are fair and equitably accessed by all. And sometimes in passing them to community groups, there's about the sustainability of that group, or whether they apply the same levels of fairness and equality in terms of access to people. So I think there is something about how we ensure social value and community value without necessarily disposing of assets or passing them out, for me. I think the other thing that I recognise, I've always worked in the public sector, so I recognise absolutely the needs for the duties for transparency and fairness in how we deal with contractors, and it comes back to some of the points about governance we raised in the best value earlier, and concerns, and also a false perception amongst some of the public that I've never seen a brown envelope in my life, but anything to do with the council, it's always that brown envelopes are exchanging hands. They're really not, and if they are, then absolutely that's something that should be taken up with the monitoring officer or with the chief executive, if anyone has any evidence of those things. But I do worry a little bit about the centre of expertise, and the language is variable in the report still, because we've migrated in that terminology. But in my experience working particularly with projects and some of the work around FSEM and the transport departments, the expertise actually sits within the service, and very often there's a frustration with how difficult it is sometimes to get the resource to move things forward. And alongside the fact that our expenditure is all limited currently because of our financial situation, procurement difficulties is always raised as the other issue as to why people can't do stuff. And I think somehow we need to get beyond that and find ways to make sure that centre of expertise is providing both the expertise, capacity, and the support to do the right thing. Because sometimes people seem to do things on frameworks or in ways that are simplified versions of procurement because they fear the procurement process, and that then isn't necessarily of benefit to particularly local businesses who might feel that we have a preferred supplier that is remote, or that just doesn't share out the work in a way that supports them. So I hope that we can build those sorts of things in as we go forward for the future. But I recognise that we are working a framework which is about probity and clarity and the values that we must as a public organisation adhere to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hadley. Councillor Brown.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, just to follow on a bit from what Councillor Hannah said in the introduction. I'm pleased to see this report come to Cabinet. It's been through various sort of iterations and drafts and discussions, but it's now sort of, in my view, sort of nicely focused really on the recommendations B, C and D, particularly that we've got before us, about the officer review, about the combined commissioning procurement centre of expertise and separation of those functions, which are detailed in the report. The preparations for the Procurement Act 2023, which are coming in by the end of this month. And then particularly the procurement and contracts management strategy for 2024 to 2028. And in response to Councillor Canavan's point, I think it is a very good point around social value. And I think a number of us have discussed over the years about procurement in terms of environmental and sustainability sort of issues around procurement, and sort of also local suppliers, as well as sort of social value. I think hopefully looking at the strategy that is picked up, particularly in themes 3 and themes 4, around theme 3 is local communities, and theme 4 talks a lot about healthy, safe and sustainable. And I think the process for sort of making sure that those are being delivered is detailed then in, I think, paragraph 5.4 of the strategy, is that progress is reported to audit and governance at 6-month intervals. So I think that will be the process to speak at audit and governance, or members that are on audit and governance to actually probe that and ask those questions around sort of, well, okay, the strategy says this, can you give me some examples of where that's made a difference or how we've delivered on these? So I think that will be the process for actually monitoring and influencing the sort of delivery of this strategy. Outside of that, I think the report's very clear, but I would, Councillor Hannah sort of thanks various people and myself. I'd have to thank Mr. Hornsby, Phil Hornsby, our Director of Commissioning, for his work on delivering this report. And to be honest, as the portfolio holder previously covering commissioning and procurement, it was always invaluable to me that somebody so experienced and knowledgeable in that area to be able to sort of rely on their knowledge and expertise around this, both Phil and his team of officers behind him. So I'd like to thank him for this report, and particularly because he's due to retire from BCP Council later this month. So just want to put on record my thanks to him around all the work he's done on commissioning and procurement across adult social care, and all his sort of support within BCP Council and previously at Poole Council. His knowledge and experience is invaluable, and it will be a loss that he's retiring, but he's going on to sort of better things, I'm sure. So
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. Any other members of Cabinet wishing to speak? Nope, I'm not seeing anyone indicate. So, Jeff, would you like to sum up at all? Anything to add?
Yes, please, Leader. First of all, to acknowledge the points that Councillor Canavan has made. I don't actually disagree with his concerns at all. I share them. It does say something about the way in which Councillor Brown and I have worked together, that he's already preempted what I was going to do, which was to refer to the strategy theme 3, local communities, which is on page 269, which does set out various ways in which procurement will seek to achieve various of those aims, although not all of them. The one specific that Councillor Canavan mentioned that I would comment on is the passing of assets on to communities. And I think that this report is actually completely neutral on that. It's not seeking to restrict, it's not seeking to enable, it's a different kind of issue. And it's one which we are working on in different ways. That said, can I also acknowledge Councillor Hadley's concerns in terms of where expertise lies. The report is very much looking at the top level of structure and putting that in place. And it remains to be seen as to how procurement can be further developed in order to address the concerns that Councillor Hadley is expressing. But I think one of the key things that this report does achieve is that we will have member involvement. We will have those 6 monthly reports to audit, and there will be the opportunity for members to probe and explore and ensure that we are using our expertise within the council in the best possible way. So with those comments, thank you to councillors for the contributions, and I do move the recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hannah. So can I get an indication of all those in favour of accepting the recommendations? Thank you. Again, that is unanimous. So we're just moving towards the end of the agenda now. We have 2 more items, and then we will jump back to agenda item 7, which was on risk and insurance. So agenda item 14 is urgent decisions taken by the Chief Executive in accordance with the Constitution. Chief Executive Officer Graham Farrant, do you have any urgent decisions that have taken place since the last meeting in July?
No, nothing since the last meeting, Leader.
Thank you very much. And agenda item 15 is the Cabinet Forward Plan. So this was published last night or yesterday daytime, I think. So it is out there for councillors to have a look at, and again, a really good way to base scrutiny decisions and what actually needs to be looked at in closer detail. And I would also just say, you know, scrutiny is a process, and it's a really, really important one. We have three committees, one board, and we also have things like audit and governance, which have an element of scrutiny in them as well. But I would really encourage those structures are used when we're looking at the forward plan, and likewise, if there are things which don't fit into the scrutiny timetable, then I would really encourage the chairs to come and approach cabinet members to try and get some clarity, or to speak to officers to help feed into that. So the items on the forward plan give that kind of view of what's coming up, and our chairs of scrutiny committees, I just want to really empower them to use that role to the best of their ability. Okay, so we're going to move back to agenda item 7, which is risk and insurance and the annual review contract update renewals. Just to remind members and the public that this includes some confidential appendices, so we've put it at the end in case we need to go into a private session. We don't want everyone to have to hang around just looking at a blank screen if they're watching online. Councillor Cox is going to present and propose this paper. Is there someone to second?
Yes, Leader, happy to second that.
Thank you very much, Councillor Brown. This item didn't go to overview and scrutiny committees, but I will pass over now to Councillor Mike Cox to present it.
Thank you, Leader. I'll introduce it and probably have to go into exempt session probably shortly afterwards. This is really a report to update councillors on the insurance contract review and any material changes. The insurance market, as I'm sure many people know, is becoming increasingly restrictive, and the position of all local authorities, particularly BCP, is not good when considering an open market tender, not least because we have a poor claims history. As a result, we have long-term arrangements with insurance companies where renewals are carefully negotiated and changes made where appropriate. There are some detailed recommendations which I'm going to start mentioning, some figures, so you probably want to go into exempt session.
Thank you very much, Councillor Cox. I just want to give a very brief opportunity to councillors who are not on cabinet if they want to express anything. Nope. Thank you very much, Councillor Canavan. I can't see anyone indicating online. So with that, we will go into an exempt session. I know that I have something I need to read out here. This might be the first time I've done this. So under section 100A4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the public be excluded from the meeting for the following item of business on the grounds that they involve the likely disclosure of exempt information as defined in paragraph 3 in part 1 of schedule 12A of the Act, and that the public interest in withholding information outweighs such interest in disclosing the information. So I'm going to need a proposer and a seconder for us to move into that session. So Councillor Cox, you have proposed. Councillor Hadley, thank you for seconding. So thank you very much to the public for joining us today. We don't have any in the room, but I'm sure there's people watching online. And so I'll close this session and we'll move into exempt session. Thank you. Hello and welcome back to this meeting of Cabinet. We were discussing agenda item number 7, which was the Risk and Insurance Annual Review Contract Update Renewals. And we went into an exempt session because of the appendices being sensitive and confidential. I just want to give everyone's assurance that we've discussed that quite thoroughly, and we now need to move to a vote on accepting the recommendation to accept the key recommendations that are in the appendices. So can I please just get a show of hands as to who is happy to support that? Thank you very much, Cabinet. That is unanimous. So I think all that's left for me to do is to formally close the meeting and say thank you to everyone who has attended, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you.